hazy sativa type style. And even though there's a whole conversation to be had about indica sativa classification, have I ever talked with you guys about that?
I don't know.
Did I ever tell you guys
Maybe.
about?
I find
The,
that
No.
topic fascinating.
so have you heard about like Afghanica type? Have you heard of that terminology before?
Yeah.
I feel like I like this topic a lot. But either way, there's basically the current indica sativa paradigm is totally false. It's not really accurate. It's relevant in the way fruit and vegetable classifications are relevant for culinary situations. So like
Like apples,
tomato,
oranges, fruit,
no,
or
a tomato scientifically is a fruit,
Right.
right? A cucumber is scientifically a fruit.
Because it comes from a flower.
Well, not just that comes from a flower; it's the fruiting part of. Yeah, exactly. It comes from the fruiting part of the plant. A vegetable is part of the vegetative part. So root vegetables like sweet potato, that's a true
Yeah,
vegetable.
roots, stems,
Celery,
and leaves are
yeah,
vegetables.
exactly. And then all fruits are seeded,
Yeah.
fruit essentially.
Yep.
I didn't know
So,
that.
Corn is a fruit.
Yep, corn is a fruit, exactly. So a lot of the vegetables, but we call them the vegetables nowadays. A lot of those things, anyways, because they, from a culinary perspective, a little more bitter, a little more that. So right now we have a similar thing happening in cannabis where it's indica sativa, right? Which has been accepted commonly, but it's not the true scientific classifications of what those strains are, because sativa is not really the uplifting whatever. Sativa is actually autoflower hemp. Ruderalis. Ruderalis is not a real thing. Ruderalis is like the autoflower lineage strain, whatever, but that's not a true scientific classification. It's really cannabis sativa is hemp. So that's truly autoflower strain. Then indica is actually your sativa stuff that comes from India, generally speaking, grows more equatorial, kind of grows lankier, so on and so forth. And then Afghanica is the actual indica classification scientifically, where things that grow stocky in like Afghan mountain style type places where you get cushes and whatnot from. So that's Afghanica. So it's truly Afghanica, indica, sativa, and indica and sativa, and Afghanica is actually from the lineages of stuff that's generally supposed to get you a little more stoned. And regardless of the fact that this entire classification system is becoming irrelevant because the new conversation is anyways leaning towards combination of terpenes and cannabinoids, which is truly what it is in the end of the day. Scientifically, it's that exact combination of certain terpenes with certain cannabinoids. And obviously, for whatever reason, certain locales and regions developed things that were more towards that way or towards the other way, probably for their own survival mechanisms, but ended up having that relationship regardless. So like a Jackie sativa, for instance, right? Probably that terpene is really good at fighting certain insects in that area of the world, or maybe even attracting insects to help break down the plant material at the end of it to help the seeds get exposure and whatnot. Like it's very, very interesting, the whole thing. How they each develop their own terpenes and whatnot. And some of it might be that it's actually kind of like it is human involvement in how people wanted to breed in those areas for those certain effects, because we call it landrace, but people did used to collect and whatnot, and obviously plants do better when humans like them, as you can tell by how much corn is grown in the world. So yeah,
It's incredible.
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So if I talked about that, by the way, I'm sorry to all the people who have to listen to this whole rant again.
They can
But
fast forward.
Well, when I grew, I one thing that I learned that I found fascinating was even if you grow like an indica or a sativa, your ripeness at harvest time plays a more important role than whether your plant was an indica or sativa to begin with. Like if you're growing an indica leaning effects style plant and you harvest it early, those clearish and milkyish trichomes aren't going to be sedative. They're going to be more of a heady high. And then if you take a sativa and you let it
grow it
amber
very
out,
late, it will also
it's going to put you to sleep.
Because in the end of the day, the cannabinoids are the ultimate. They're the ultimate driver of the plant, and when you age those cannabinoids, you're getting more CBN, I think, is what it is. The degraded, I believe it's CBN. You're getting a lot more CBN the farther you push those you push those strikes, and you're getting, and even less than CBN, you're getting more activated THC on the plant too, which shouldn't really make too much of a difference because all the THCA is supposed to get converted into delta 9 ultimately, or at least a large portion of it is. So that shouldn't make the biggest difference. Sorry, I just dropped my whatever this
Yeah,
is
you
called.
gotta. Yeah, it'll stick when you pull it out and then drop off in transport. I hate it when I've lost so much glass that way, bro. It sucks.
I could imagine, but no, thankfully nothing broke. I just need to clean it
Survived.
because
Good.
the floor here is a little dirty.
Right on. Awesome.
Nice. We're back in business, baby.
Yeah,
There you go.
I usually don't buy into anything labeled. Like when it says indica or sativa or hybrid on the label, I don't give a shit what it says. I wanna smell it. And usually by the smell I can tell what the effects are gonna do for me.
Yeah, that's that tends to be the way to do it, I believe. It's smell. The nose knows, and I think each person's nose knows exactly what they want and what they like, and I think that ultimately you're going to see that whole paradigm change in the next 5 years or so, where people will hopefully stop labeling accordingly. But it's still I would say it's still
All right,
persistent
Joe.
because
Joe, you got to hit that ball, bro. You're doing it again.
no, I'm doing it on purpose. I'm just trying to burn that off.
Oh, okay. It's like, no, bro, not again. Sorry.
No. Jerry's like, why is he wasting it?
I'm gonna let him ramble right through another bowl. I can't do it.
Yeah, no. I know. I'm just preparing the next thing. I want to try the carbon fiber in there before I
Wait,
go to
is
the
it possible?
again.
Is it possible that the indica sativa labels could be valid if they were applied at a per batch level rather than at a per strain batch level? Like,
Well, first of all, I mean, as much as cannabinoids are the main driver, terpenes shouldn't be taken out of the equation. Like, definitely certain terpenes do help modulate those effects. So, with that, I think that you don't necessarily need it to be batch level. Well, even then, it technically would be batch to batch because depending on how well you grew it, usually or different stressors that might have happened, the plant will express a different level of terpenes at any given point. So the plant will either express more of, gassier terps or more sweet terps or more this or that, again, based on what it had available nutrition wise, what was stressing it out, what the temperatures were, what the humidity was. All those things can have that effect. So technically, yes, it would be different from thing, but there's general consistencies that you could expect, especially with the same cultivators and whatnot. So
yeah, I
I
think it's
would, I would,
fascinating. I
yeah,
mean,
I think you're right about batch to batch to some extent, but at the same time, I really think that the biggest twist to it all is the individual body of each person's interaction with each one of these things, because something that might be a total sativa for me,
may
regardless, might
may
be
put
an
somebody
indica
else
for
to
the next
sleep.
person.
Yeah,
It's like there's some people who just can't smoke weed, like it just doesn't do them good. It makes them, you know they don't like the fuzzy caterpillars in the brain, like
yeah, yeah. I mean,
I
it's
wonder if you could smell in your nose an indica and then look through a loop and notice if it were darker trichomes. Like, is there a correlation between that?
that would
That'd be
not be
interesting to see.
correlated. No, because that would be terpene to try. What you smell in the terpene wouldn't necessarily be related to that, unless we're talking about like, if we were to theoretically say, is there a scenario where that would be relevant? Yes. Let's say I grow a strain, and I know if I harvest it early, that when I harvest it a little earlier, it usually has these type of aromas, which is true. As you're growing the strain throughout, the aroma develops on the plant for sure. Everyone knows that. So if I know if I take it at 7 weeks, it's going to be a little sweeter, but if I take it at 9 weeks, it's going to be a little gassier. Then I might be able to say, based on the smell, oh, I know that this is probably like that. But it would have to be within that same strain, and me knowing from beginning to end of how it's meant to express itself. But let's say we're talking about the pie scream, and this is not actually true for the pie scream, so I don't want anyone to, if they get pie scream and say, oh, it's like this or like that. But let's theoretically say, if the pie scream at week 7 is a super fruity type smell, and at week 9 it's a gas fermented fruit type smell, then I would know that if I'm getting the fruitier smell, I would be able to say, oh, I bet you this is going to have more of a sativa effect just on a trichome level, because I know it was taken earlier because of that. However, if I then go look at an OG an OG will be gassy throughout the whole time. So even if I take an OG at 7, just because it's gassy doesn't equal that. So nose alone doesn't necessarily indicate it, but for strain specific, if like my OG has like a super gassy smell first, but then at the last couple of weeks it gets a funk, a gas funk, I would be able to say, oh, if it's just gassy, I know that this is probably more going to be, just a headier high. While if it's more of that gassy funk, it would be that. And again, this is not true to any of my strains as I'm saying it. This is just a theoretical explanation of how it would be possible
Okay.
to assess
I get that.
You think that applies to the bridge nose test, Troy?
What's the bridge nose test?
That's where we smell the weed, and instead of paying attention to what it smells like, you pay attention to where you feel the sensation of smell along the bridge of your nose.
Oh, I remember this. Yes.
Yeah. And so what I'm thinking is, because it's similar to what you're talking about, the terpene profile changes as it switches from sativa to indica. Could Troy just let's say could he just smell it, and if he says that's going to be an indica, and then look at it and see if it's darker trichomes as well? And you're saying that's not the correlation, but the change in terpene profile might be significant enough to have
No,
impact.
that's interesting, and I think that's related again to those other chemicals and molecules within the smell profile that aren't necessarily terpene related. That I think also develop, like when I make a plant go a little farther, I tend to notice I get more of those as I push the plant a little farther into flower. So I think that's a very interesting, and therefore I would think those hit at different parts of the nose. Essentially, is what I'm saying.
I'll be right back.